How have you reacted more recently to the unrest on campuses, particularly last year, well, earlier this year, and the demands by one of your constituencies, and you have quite a few, students in particular, to divest? And what is the approach that you've taken, and what can you share in terms of best practices, perhaps, with some of the people in this room?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I'll start with the answer to your question and then go back to the values and principles that helped me with finding this approach. Of course, it was a difficult time over the last year and a half or so, and my approach has been that when students want to have a conversation with you about something that they'd like you to do with the portfolio, you engage with them. And so one morning before the board meeting, I was out walking at UCLA's campus, and there was a tent, and they were on loudspeakers asking for the chief investment officer to divest. And I walked into the tent, and they didn't know I was there. And that continued on for a little while, and then eventually I had to tap on their shoulders and say, the person you're talking about is me, and I'm right here, so let's have this conversation. So that was a little shocking.
To them.
To them.
Yes.
And we had a conversation. I gave him my phone number, my cell phone, and my email address, and I said, call me. And this was in the early days of the conversation. 4 months later, we have a board meeting, and it gets disrupted, and I'm in the board meeting at the start of it. And so I walked up to them, and I said, look, let's have the board meeting, and we'll come back and have this conversation at the end of the board meeting, if you don't mind. And they agreed for 2 minutes and then disagreed, and we disrupted the board meeting. At the end of the board meeting, I was asked specifically by the campus police, the leadership, do not meet with the students for the disruption that had taken place. Yet when every one of the leadership left, I went to the students, missed my flight to go back home from LA to Oakland, and I said, I'd like to meet with 4 of your student leaders. And I did. And
Why?
In the meeting, because in the meeting, I said, I appreciate getting the letters from you, but let's have a conversation. This is a difficult conversation to have. There are no clear answers. There are no easy solutions. And clearly, I can't solve all of these issues, whether it's fossil fuels or affordable housing. And the list goes on, by the way, in California. Don't be mistaken with the color I'm wearing today. And
the shoelaces.
And the shoelaces. So the myriad of issues require engagement and conversation. And in that conversation, I said to the students, you know, I recognize you from 4 months ago. And they were shocked. They said, really? I said, well, I gave you my cell phone number. You never called me. And I think in there lies the issue, in that there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of name-calling, and there's a lot of accusations. But when it comes down to having a peaceful discussion, one-on-one, to understand where one side is coming from, and having them understand the challenges or the things that you can do, you begin to have a better dialogue. And it's in that meeting that I said, send me a letter, make a clear request of what you're looking for. And that led to a conversation that had a letter, and then the letter basically said I should divest from everything that had any association with Israel. And they wanted full transparency on the portfolio. So at the next meeting, I gave them full transparency on the portfolio. But I said, if you'd like me to follow what you've asked me for, then I'd like to sell everything we own in U.S. Treasuries. And they said, why? I said, well, that's $32 billion of $188 billion, and we are the biggest backers. And that's where they said, okay, we'll have another conversation with you. And after that conversation, we've had a lot of constructive dialogues. And candidly, I haven't felt the pressure in my office, which is very odd to say because I tend to be the target for these things,
right,
compared to the rest of the environment. And so I feel that that is because for the last 10 years that I've been in this role at the University of California, I have firmly believed one thing. When you come to a university and you're a student, you're in there to learn from your professors and your faculty. But students also teach the faculty and the staff, just like our kids teach us every day. And we need to learn from them. And if we need to learn from them, then they become the early warning detection system for our office. We're only 52 people managing $188 billion. It's impossible for us to know everything about every issue that's either today or arising. And so in that conversation and an open dialogue and open access and transparency comes trust. And I do that at a grassroots level. So when these situations arise, we can at least engage on the discussion. Now, this sounds so simple, but the difficulty is to actually do it, because the time it takes, probably 25 to 30% of my time. And you know what?
And that was not time that you had allocated previously.
No, but you know what? It's important, because
Yeah.
it's more important for me to spend time on my campuses with our students than to be at an interview at CNBC. Because when the issues are tough, that's my customer base.